Hey, George, are you there?
Hey, John. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. I am doing fine, George, and I think we can tell Blogging Heads people that we have just had several false starts due to just unforeseen circumstances of the kind that happen in life, little tiny miniature black swans that come fluttering into our lives and disrupt things.
Yes, the black swans. Bertrand Russell's thing about the limits of the power of induction and how you can't find absolute truth because you could spend your whole life seeing swans and noting that they're white and conclude that there's some universal principle by which swans are white, and then along comes the black swan.
And thank God for that. Thank God for novelty. Thank God that this big, crazy, complicated universe can surprise the hell and scare the hell and startle us and do all kinds of crazy shit to us, and will never be within our power to predict or control.
So you prefer that to the Laplacian universe?
Oh my God! Who would want to be? I mean, in a Laplacian universe, you're just like a particle in a big bag of gas. That would be the ultimate.
Well, yeah, this was pre-quantum. So what was Laplace's famous observation that give me the the position and movement of every, essentially, he said, of every particle in the universe, and I could predict the future herewith, in theory, or that a being with such faculty, referring to some godlike creature, if they knew the state of the universe at n equals the present, they could extrapolate into the future and predict the future, and then, which of course would be a huge amount of information processing. But then comes, quantum mechanics and nonlinearity and black, and black swans of various kinds.
And humans with each of which has an absolutely unique mind that is a product of all its previous life history and is going to do weird shit. I mean, humans are
sometimes malfunction.
Humans do not conform. Humans have free will. They do not conform to the Laplacian model.
No. Yeah. That's a big thing for you. Free will and getting down on the people who deny that it exists and it's only an illusion. And my gut instinct says you're right.
Oh, thank you. I thought your gut instinct said I was wrong. I seem to remember some conversations over beers at the Templeton Foundation, surrounded by the glories of the University of Cambridge, and I felt like I was trying to stick up for free will, which is actually probably the official position of the Templeton Foundation. I hate to be in their company, but I remember, as I recall, I got some blowback from you and some other people who were making me feel very naive.
Well, I mean, if you're really gonna look at it, and if you really believe that the mind is a manifestation of the brain, and not in any spooky sense, so the brain is like this biochemical machine-like thing, and it has all these very complex linear machinery. The machinery isn't really the right word, but it's deterministic in the sense that, some of it, it's probabilistic, but in any case, you can make predictions just as you can with any model that exists in the physical world. That's it's computable.
I disagree with that because I think
but that's really pretty much the mainstream view, I'd say, of neuroscience. They wouldn't put it that way, but basically, the brain is like a biological device of some sort. It can all be explained, physically, energy and matter and in that sense, what is this free will thing? This would mean that you could step out of your brain and you get into the homunculus problem where you have the I, capital I, inside your head that's supposed to be somehow separate and ethereal from your brain that's willing you to do this or to do that, and that really it's hard to explain. Except, just with a lot of hand-waving as an emergent property of this very complex device like a brain. So that's probably the sense in which we were arguing over over a pint at the Eagle Tavern.
Yeah. Listen up. Maybe this is a time for me to bring up something that happened at Stevens last week that it bears on this question, I think. A topic that I know you've done a lot of writing and thinking about it in your career. Complexity has reared its head on the campus of my school, Stevens Institute, recently, because the engineering side of Stevens, which is the dominant side, recently created something called the Center for Complex Systems and Enterprises. It really just...
Everyone's got one of these now.
That's right. And they just had their inaugural event last Tuesday. And I was invited. A few humanities people were invited to speak at the very end after people had started drinking cocktails and so forth. And what was great was that, I was sort of, when I heard about this thing, I was thinking, wow, I wonder if they mean complexity at all in the same sense as the people at the Santa Fe meant it back in the 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, and then it turns out that they do, at least they are aware of that, because John Casti was one of the speakers, although he ended up getting stuck in Vienna, Austria, where he lives now, and so he had to give his talk by Skype, which is too bad because he also, we didn't really get a chance to interact that much, and I look forward to that.
Oh, well, John, God, this is so, for those who don't know, complexity this whole science of complexity started in a big way here in Santa Fe with the Santa Fe Institute, which, looking out the window, I can see through the trees on the far hill.
Is that right?
And,
really?
Yeah, see it from my office. And John Casti just lived just up my little dirt road here in Santa Fe, and he was one of the first people I got to know after I moved to Santa Fe. He moved here with his wife Vivian just a year before, to take some kind of appointment at the Santa Fe Institute. And I'd read his book Paradigms Regained and introduced myself. And we ended up being pretty good friends. We'd walk back and forth to each other's houses, and I'd borrow books from his extensive library. And
he's a perfect Santa Fe Institute kind of guy because he's sort of a polymath. He was trained as a mathematician, but he's written kind of literary nonfiction, imagining conversations between, I think, Wittgenstein and other.
There was the Cambridge Quartet.
He's
no longer, for various reasons, he's no longer associated with the Santa Fe Institute, but I guess he's in Vienna at this thing called IASA, I-A-S-A.
Yep. Well, he wrote I got to know him back in the 90s when I was...
Bashing Complexity.
I wrote this nasty, actually excessively nasty. I look back on it recently when I was preparing some remarks for this complexity conference at Stevens, and I had to admit it was that piece was a little bit over the top, even for me. Although
you were really very acidly.
Yeah,
you've really mellowed, John.
Oh, okay. I guess I don't know. I'll take that as a compliment. But I think my basic objections to complexity, I still adhere to. But just quickly, to go back to Casti, he wrote. So I wrote this article for Scientific American called "From Complexity to Perplexity." But Scientific American, my editor, put the tagline on the cover of the magazine: "Is complexity a sham?" Which is
I remember that.
Very harsh, and that was actually from John Rennie. It wasn't from me, although I didn't have terrible objections to it.
No, I would have thought that pretty much captured the essence of the piece.
True,
but you were really raising a red flag in what was really rather a small bull.
That's true. But
they're just trying to get this new venture off the ground.
But they had gotten a ton of press. These over-the-top sort of hagiographies, institutional hagiographies from Mitch Waldrop and who else? I mean, there were a bunch of people who wrote about the Santa Fe Institute.
Yeah, there were two books called Complexity, and then during at the same time, the super agent of the science writing stars, John Brockman, came into Santa Fe, and then he signed up Murray Gell-Mann and Stuart Kaufman. Yeah, the Quark and the Jaguar, and he signed up Stuart Kaufman at Home in the Universe, and another book from this artificial life guy, Chris Langton, yeah, and got them these really big advances, and then the problem came that they actually had to write the books. And
well, what I loved about it was that
it was exciting.
Pardon me?
It was very exciting.
It was exciting. It was inspiring. It was sort of like the ultimate kind of intellectual, scientific, philosophical salon, but the problem, and I just want to emphasize that.
So you had your work cut out for you.
Well, I felt ambivalent because I love talking to some of these people, like Chris Langton and Stuart Kaufman and Murray Gell-Mann and Brian Arthur and all the Crutchfield and
Brian Arthur
and the other folks. They were all so smart and so sort of fizzy-headed, just ideas popping off their brains. But the objection...
Volcanic, let's call it. Yeah, volcanic minds.
But the skepticism that I had, and to a certain extent, was I was passing on the very harsh judgments of people like John Maynard Smith, the great British biologist.
Yeah.
He had the phrase, which I quoted, that it was fact-free science going on at the Santa Fe Institute. Edward Wilson was, I don't think I quoted it in my article, but he wrote me a letter afterwards thanking me for taking down the people in the field of complexity because he thought it was a bunch of hot air.
Which is not true, really.
It's not entirely true, but the problem I had was that the grand claim, there was some good, solid work going on, but it was the grand claims that. Well,
yeah, but that's. Yeah, and actually, a lot of the people at the Santa Fe Institute, they're ambivalent. On one hand, they really, of course, liked getting all the new attention. I mean, this was an amazing venture. A few people from Los Alamos, like George Cowan, just kind of breaking away from their theory group and starting this whole new thing in an old convent just down on Canyon Road in Santa Fe. And then, so they were glad to get the attention. And then on the other hand, there were a few people that, got a lot of the limelight just naturally because they were making very, very bold pronouncements. Like Stuart Kaufman was talking about a new science of complexity that would be like the fourth law of thermodynamics, like a new basic principle that would explain how complexity arises out of simple interactions.
As self-organization principle.
Self-organization, but all of which is perfectly legitimate, concepts. And then, but just to continue, then you had more conservative people like. Believe it or not, Murray Gell-Mann was one of the, and he was more like, well, no, this isn't going to take any new laws, he would say,
Something else is what he called it.
Well, what did he say?
He said he used when I interviewed him, he used the phrase something else. He says, there are these
something
people,
else, that was it.
There are these people, they think to explain all these things you need something else.
Something else, and he would roll his eyes in that Murray Gell-Mann kind of way.
There isn't something else.
It's evolution plus, it's natural selection plus frozen accidents.
Right.
And the frozen accidents, things that just happen randomly and then get locked into the system through evolution.
Right.
The spandrels. These are where complexity arises. So he was taking a much more conservative view. But, taken all together, it was really, this really, and still is, this really bold effort to focus, not on the reductionist end of science without denying reductionism and its power, but to say, let's concentrate on these levels where, we just take the system as it is, without trying to reduce it to quantum mechanics, and then explain and see what kind of principles these complex systems have in common. So what does a stock market have in common with
an immune system?
An immune system, and and I'm not sure that a whole lot, but a lot of interesting thinking has come out of that. There hasn't been any new fourth law of thermodynamics, although Stuart Kaufman still really continues in that vein, as far as I can tell, with his thinking, and the institute itself has become, in my view, more they're emphasizing more just the interdisciplinary aspect of it, which was there from the very beginning, of just getting people from different sciences to come together and see if they can inform and inspire each other.
Well, so here's I was sort of going back and looking at some of the boilerplate from, and it wasn't just the Santa Fe Institute. There were also people like Ilya Prigogine, Steve Wolfram was interested in these sorts of issues, and all the people who were involved in chaos theory, going back to the 80s and 70s, and
solid state physics.
That's right. It was a lot of the same mathematical techniques, computer modeling methods that people were using, and very similar rhetoric. And chaos kind of ran its course. And this is one reason I was somewhat cynical, is that I was maybe too sensitive to the marketing dimension of a field like complexity, and taking some old stuff that had kind of already the luster had started to fade a little bit, and repackaging it with a fancy new buzzword, and then reselling it, attracting the attention of journalists. But I agree with you.
No, but they weren't really trying to. I mean, if people like George Cowan, who one of the founders of the Santa Fe Institute. And they're real interested.
An old Reagan hawk.
Oh, well, yeah, but if you know George, you'd never guess it.
Really? Okay.
No, George he died a couple of years ago. Well, I don't know if he was 90 or, pretty far up there after really getting into in his 80s, just organizing all this interesting research in childhood development. But no, George is one of the most wonderful, humane, kind people you could imagine. And this isn't like they were hyping something, to make money, which is what happens, so much in the world. They were really something they were excited about, and especially their niche really was getting these interdisciplinary groups together. So like the first Santa Fe Institute conference that I went to, I was living in New York, and I came out here. This was back when they were down in the old convent, and it was on, they were bringing economists together with physicists and biologists, and now people talk about econophysics, and there's this whole thing of people getting degrees in high energy physics, and then instead of going into string theory, they go into Wall Street and do derivatives, which are much more complex than superstrings. But just bringing these different minds together, I think that's what inspired them.
And I think that's what the hope is at Stevens. Let me try to. I want to make it clear that I think the ambition is admirable, and I think you can't rule out the possibility that they will find something really significant by comparing different complicated phenomena. Something as different as a cell, an economy, an immune system, a terrorist network. I mean, this is how diverse.
Or an ancient Anasazi pre-Pueblo society.
That's right, and there's sort of
and
different ways that you can talk about having this kind of finding common ground among all these different things. Maybe you just find a mathematical tool or a modeling technique that can apply to all these different things. And we already
that you didn't know about, that it was like in your own discipline and then transfer it to another.
Yeah.
But no, I take your
that.
point.
I mean, we have, calculus. Think how widely. So it's not like we're not surrounded by all sorts of demonstration proofs of these things.
Yeah.
But I think the more fascinating, the idea that really hooked me in was the Stuart Kaufman idea of there actually being something in nature that
law of
some
complexity,
common principle or pattern that emerges when you get a lot of these different moving parts interacting with each other, whether they are like bit streams that represent the stock market or all the different components of a cell or T cells in our bloodstream and all the and then the question is, is it really worthwhile, instead of doing science the traditional way and focusing and saying that each system has to be understood on its own, is there some benefit to be gained by looking at a whole bunch of different systems in tandem? And that's still an open question. When I was
when I
was listening to this conference at Stevens, I was reminded of a talk given by Jeffrey Sachs, the economist at Columbia, when he came to Stevens. And so he first started getting famous basically by introducing capitalism to some of the old Soviet satellite states like Poland after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he had some success. He started making his reputation for these measures he introduced in Poland, and then he got sort of full of himself, and then he was invited by other countries like Bolivia, was the one that sticks out in my mind, which was also having terrible economic problems. And Sachs came in and tried to do the same thing that he did in Poland, and it didn't work at all. It was terrible. It was it caused more harm than good, and he learned this painful lesson that each of these societies, each of these economies had to be understood on its own terms, and that if you're trying to fix it, if you're trying to manage it, you have to realize that each one is unique and understand its own history and geography and so forth.
Sure.
And so that is kind of the counter lesson. And it's not to say you go totally in that direction, because obviously
obviously there's commonalities.
Right.
I mean, you could say that about each individual human you cannot understand without understanding their history and from the time they were zygotes and the way they developed in the womb to when they were exposed to the world and all the randomness of that, and frozen accidents and contingencies. And yet you like to think that there's some kind of human nature-like thing, and that there's, if not exactly principles of psychology, there's things that you can glean and learn from people in general that might help individuals.
Well, there are. On the other hand, I think it's clear that I teach Freud and William James in this freshman humanities class at Stevens, and it's remarkable how, especially William James, he is just absolutely he reads as though he could have written these things today. About the nature of thought and how fluid thought is, how thought is something that is qualitatively different than any physical objects addressed by physics. And so if there is a science of the mind, it's going to be qualitatively different than any of the physical sciences. And that has turned out to be the case. And it's
to the extent you can even say there's a science.
Well, that's my point. Is that I think when it comes to any of the complex systems with humans as moving parts in them, those sciences that try to capture economic activity, political activity, international relations, all these sorts of things are really weak. That's why we call them soft sciences. I think that will always be the case. So the question is, in fact, there was just a piece on the Brockman website that addressed this question: can the social sciences ever be approach the rigor of physics
Ah, okay. Yeah, no, of course they can't. I mean,
well, some people I think still hope that with better modeling techniques and so forth.
yeah.
But, I mean, one of the
Well,
points
you can improve it, but nothing like where you're going to get force equals mass times acceleration.
Because of free will, George.
Or if you're going to get, well, I just think it's because the brain is just horrendously complex, and we're trying to understand the brain, and we're using the brain to try to understand the brain, and it brings up all kinds of. I mean, again, I don't think either of us are mind-body dualists who think that the mind is some separate, thing from the body. And once you do that, you're getting into the supernatural. And,
no, I think it just me. All I've tried to argue when I make the case for free will is that that psychology. There are these emergent forms of causation. When you talk about human minds and human societies and the power of ideas that are not that can never be reduced to their physical substrate and to the causation at that level.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll buy emergent. It's a lot of hand waving, right? Emergent causal principles, but it has to. But that's your point, really, that you can't really explain what they are, because you can't reduce them to some reductionist substrate.
Well, here's another factor that I think has to be taken into account.
Yeah.
The models, and I'm sure I must have said this in some past Blogging Heads chat with you, that the models that we have of ourselves change us. So
Marx
changed us. Keynes changed us. Freud changed us. And so this happens in a really powerful way, and no hand waving, emergent, pseudoscientific, philosophical claptrap about it. Models of the stock market change the behavior of the stock market.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, it's nonlinear, which is just a fancy way of saying, it's a feedback loop.
Right.
So, and the feedback produces behavior that feeds back further. And yet people who play the stock market try to take that into account, either with these crazy, much too precise systems that always fail, or just with the sort of instinctual thing of, you're not really judging what the market's going to do based on the economic fortunes of companies anymore, if anyone ever did that, but you're anticipating how people perceive that, and then how people perceive what the perceivers are perceiving. And everyone's playing, all these meta levels removed from the actual substrate of, money changing hands and flowing through the economy. So I mean, the idea that that's going to be something that's, more than maybe roughly predictable, if even that is, it's not going to happen in our lifetime.
It's not going to happen. I say that.
Probably not.
I say that
Probably
definitively. I forget if we've talked about this before. Did you ever read Foundation by Isaac Asimov?
Oh God, a long time ago. In fact, the very first rock band that I was in high school was called the Second Foundation.
Oh man, you're such a nerd, George. But it just reminds me, I just read an article. This is a real digression, sorry about this, but there was a really charming article in the Times about all these neuroscience and neurophilosophy rock bands in the New York area that just had a big festival. Joe Ledoux was in one, and David Chalmers, the shaggy-haired philosopher.
Yeah, the consciousness is fundamental guy.
Was in another. The reason I brought up Foundation was because if you remember, the main character is this mathematician genius named Harry Seldon, who has invented a field called psychohistory that applies methods of statistical mechanics to basically to the entire galactic civilization, and he can predict what's going to happen. But the catch, I love this, the catch is that if he reveals the predictions to people, then they can change their behavior as a result.
Yeah.
So, for example, if he says that there is going to be, and he foresees a terrible war that will destroy the civilization, but he chooses not to make that
Yeah.
public, and as a result, the civilization does collapse. And the assumption is that if he had revealed it, possibly people could have said, we're not going to do this. We're going to try to avoid this fate.
Yeah. And then they wouldn't have had a war.
Well, on the other hand, what I love about it is that if he revealed the prediction, it could have triggered the war because it would have launched preemptive strikes by one side against the other.
Oh, so that's or if it did work and he predicted the war and then people made efforts and then the war didn't happen, then they would say he was a false prophet.
Right.
And
that's the dilemma of social science.
Yeah, I like that. Oh.
So,
and all this was like a long loop around you're saying that they're starting to do complexity at Stevens.
Well, and so the interesting twist at Stevens is whether an engineering approach. I mean, the engineering approach was kind of implicit in a lot of the. I just remembered another person from back then, John Holland, the computer scientist.
Yeah, right.
And was saying that we can. He talked about cures for cancer, cures for AIDS. That this research could lead to these really deep insights into the evolution of complex systems. But so at Stevens, the emphasis is particularly on big, complicated systems with a lot of technology built in. So energy systems, national security, defense, healthcare, and finance. Those are the big.
So much less theoretical and.
Well, it's still pretty.
Well, theoretical, but with engineering kind of.
Yeah, so give us
goals.
Something we can use to, I don't know, reduce volatility in the stock market or get healthcare prices down.
Yeah,
and what was fascinating to me, and I pointed this out in a piece that I wrote about the conference or just before the conference, is that innovation, which obviously is intended to solve some problems, and often creates kind of meta problems that are that overwhelm any short-term gain you got from innovation.
Things bite back.
And it's the huge. I think the most glaring example of that right now is medical technology.
Yeah.
Which there was a talk on Tuesday from a guy at Georgia Tech, really impressive guy. I think his name is Brownstein. He's a physician, but also deeply into IT. And he said that he thought medical technology. He presented evidence that medical technology is a major factor in the extremely high healthcare costs.
Oh,
in
sure.
The United States.
Yeah.
Which is disturbing,
Yeah.
That you get these newfangled imaging devices and drugs and so forth, and they might give us some small advantages, but meanwhile they cost so much that the overall quality of care is eroded.
Yeah.
If you look at the introduction of computers on Wall Street, obviously they've given some companies enormous advantages if they have the fastest computer, the most sophisticated model, and so forth. But they've introduced so much more volatility into the system. You get these flash crashes, and nobody even knows why they happen.
Well, yeah, that's true, and yet they're recovered from rather quickly too.
Well, some of the Wall Street people seem to recover, but meanwhile, that the economy as a whole, in some cases, suffers, and
I mean, yeah, we're still muddling through from 2008, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole derivatives thing, just these incredibly complex meta abstract investment models,
which are made possible by powerful computers that can supposedly predict their performance and gives people...
Well, yeah, powerful computers and powerful, incredibly ambitious people,
Right.
Exploiting every... I mean, that's just the way the system has come to work. And then the black swan comes along where you think you have, the people talking with the derivatives market about how risk has now been managed to the extent that, it's not risky anymore. And then suddenly, something you didn't anticipate. So this is the black swan, like in this book, Nicholas Taleb, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you'd mentioned, I saw on your blog on Scientific American that you were writing about Nicholas Taleb, and he has a new book called Anti-Fragile, and he had come out to Stevens, and it sounds like he was just a delightful man to work with. Good to know.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good setup. Well, this is a guy, I knew he had this kind of cult following, and because of the book he wrote, he wrote several books. I think one was called Fooled by Randomness, but the big one that really took off.
Black Swan was huge.
Yeah, and so this is a guy who was a Wall Street trader, very sharp. I guess he did pretty well, but he considers himself a kind of, like Socrates, and like a thinker, a philosopher, a free thinker. And that his ideas apply not just to economics and finance, but to everything on the planet. And the Black Swan, the reason I liked it is because he's got this huge personality, and he just is so full of himself. But he's also a fantastic storyteller, and he has a way of presenting ideas that is very sort of in your face and provocative. Mm-hmm. And so I invited him to Stevens because I thought especially the business people would like it, and they did. And he gave a preview of this new book, Anti-Fragile, and I think I mentioned in this piece in Scientific American that he was definitely a pain in the ass. He had all these conditions for appearing, and we sent out a very sort of bland, generic press release about his appearance, and he flipped out, and he told me that he hates journalists. He thinks they're scum of the earth, and
wow, great way to
do with them, and was offended that we had invited any to our or even allowing them to come to his talk. This kind of show. But anyway, he's. The piece that I wrote for Scientific American said that he's actually a pain in the ass as an author as well, but he's so original in the way that he phrases things, so provocative that it's worth reading. And he's the issues, the topics that he's addressing are really important. They're related to what we were just talking about: complexity and our dependence on big, often volatile, unpredictable, complex systems in modern civilization, and how do we maximize the benefits of these big systems and minimize the risks that they pose to us? And his solution is this concept of anti-fragile, which doesn't mean just robust and resilient. It means that things can actually benefit and grow stronger from chaos and stress and so forth. So that's.
So it's different. The Santa Fe Institute has this whole program called Robustness, where they study those kinds of questions. But what can you? Yeah, does he have any?
Well, one of the sort of funny things that I thought came through. There's in a way, there's a little bit of a libertarian. He's hard to categorize. Sometimes he seems almost like a Tea Party right-wing nut, but he's, because he's extremely skeptical of big government, but he's also does a lot of bashing of big corporations, big banks as well. Some of his rhetoric really sounds like the old 60s, 70s. Small is beautiful concept.
Ooh, wow.
So that you need to decentralize. You should have lots of small businesses and lots of small governments. May be a better, more robust, anti-fragile than gigantic, complicated systems.
That worked really well in the Balkans.
Yeah, right. Good point. Listen, I'm ambivalent about this because it's the old hippie in me thought and still thinks small is beautiful is kind of groovy.
Edward Shoemaker.
Yeah, it's kind of groovy. I have this guy I used to live around here named Kirkpatrick Sale. He's an old anarchist.
Oh yeah, right.
He's kind of he's into this modern secession movement, and on the other hand, big government does a lot of things right. You know,
I know.
Big government protects us against the abuses of power of local sheriffs and governors and
and the abuses of the market.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm an old unreformed FDR New Dealer Democrat.
Yeah. So.
And no, I mean obviously it's you can't have complete top-down management, but you need to have a fair amount coming down from the top to get the parts to work together, to encourage them to mesh. And
I think, I don't know, so the lessons that you extract from his writings are kind of the obvious ones. I think you want to have error correction mechanisms in your system, so you never say, now we have found an optimal solution for this traditional problem. We're going to apply this, and it's called communism. You have to have a way of. You have to be humble and say, this is what we're going to try, but this is our fail-safe mechanism if it doesn't work out. And that's what that's what democracy is, basically.
Well, yeah, right. I was thinking error correction. It's just that you think of it working on the level of the U.S. Congress and Senate and then the Supreme Court, and and how it acts very imperfectly over decades at best. And
right. And
like the whole healthcare thing. So we get just having this horribly expensive, cost spiraling out of control, chaotic system of private insurers based all on the profit incentive, and then just needing some kind of top-down correction for that. And after years and years going through Hillary Clinton, when Bill Clinton was president, and trying to get something really real single payer kind of national health insurance, fails utterly, and you get this right-wing reaction, and then finally you get this cobbled together compromise that the Republicans deride as Obamacare, but which is actually quite a good accomplishment as it slowly fades in, and it definitely is helping to ease some inequities. But then you get people biting back and saying, how dare the government try to give me free health care. It's just bizarre.
It is
bizarre.
But
it is this long, slow, plodding sort of error correction that, but it's not always, the errors aren't always corrected.
Well, when I finally talked at the end of this complexity thing on Tuesday, and I said, I brought up some of the same points that I'd made back in 1995, I guess it was, and his complexity is sham. Nobody even knows what a complexity is. That it's usually it can be a synonym for interesting, but nobody wants to pay for research on a grand theory of interesting things. And the history is kind of embarrassing. Boom bust cycles with cybernetics and chaos and catastrophe theory. So I went through, and then I made my points about social phenomena being completely intractable, blah blah blah. And I pointed out at the end, though, that over the past century, lifespans have doubled, and there's just a piece in the Times today about how longevity or average lifespan just went up in the last few years around the Earth. Plus the number of people living in really life-threatening poverty the proportion of humanity. It's gone way down over the last century. Let's see, what are the other ones? Tyranny has declined. 2/3 of humanity lives under democracy today, about 10% 100 years ago. And the world is less warlike than it was in the first half of the 20th century. So, in spite
given another 10,000 years.
Well, we're doing something right, is my point. We don't have a theory of complexity, but we're managing our affairs pretty
somewhat, in any case, somewhat better. Cumulatively.
There is progress.
On my better days, I can see that. And
I give that little speech to my students at the end of each semester to help them believe in the future.
And yet there's still just such horrible economic disparity and suffering. And I was just reading this book by Catherine Boo, Beyond the Beautiful Forevers. It just got the National Book Award.
I've heard about it. Do you recommend it?
Oh, it's really good. I mean, it's just an amazing feat of journalism. She spent several years following these people in the slum in Bombay or Mumbai, just right outside the airport, and got to know a few people well enough just to kind of really give you a sense of their lives, and yet, in addition to just this crushing poverty and the corruption of dealing with the police like the main protagonists found this niche in the local economy as a garbage picker, and then just finding things people throw away that he can sell to recyclers, like plastic bottles and pieces of paper, and if you find an aluminum can, it's like this great thing, and this whole economy that develops from this, and these people totally crushed down, and yet all really aspiring to get ahead. Aspiring and helping each other on the best cases, scheming against each other in the worst cases, but very, very vibrant, and just the fact that she could capture this story in itself is amazing, and the writing's really, really good too.
Is it by the end? Do you feel like it's expressing hope in what's happening in India now, or is it an indictment of globalization?
Well, it's not. The book really, it doesn't step back and really try to be political or prescriptive in any sense. I mean, the really great thing about it is just, it's just really good hardcore journalism of just letting you see what this is like, and then putting these people's lives into this interesting narrative that involves this one-legged woman. Apparently this very obnoxious person living in this shanty town slum, who ends up dousing herself with gasoline or kerosene and setting herself on fire because she's so mad at her neighbors and is trying to show them, and then this kid, the garbage picker, getting blamed for her murder when he really didn't do it, and then just going through this just incredibly labyrinthine, horrible, Kafkaesque court system, and wow, and then the family. It's just amazing.
I just yesterday finished reading. For some reason, I'm on this kick to read great books, and so I did Ulysses a while ago.
Yeah, right.
I just finished The Grapes of Wrath.
Oh God, that's so good.
I don't know, God, I felt like joining the Communist Party by the end.
I know.
It's so powerful. For those, everybody's heard of it. Of course, you may have seen the movie with, I kept imagining Henry Fonda as Tom Joad.
Oh, yeah.
But this is just, 80 years ago, in this country, there were masses of people starving to death. Because they were being displaced. These are farmers who had a couple of bad years, and taking out loans, and the banks called in the loans. The people were dispossessed, and it's the great.
There's no support system.
Pardon me?
No support system at all.
No support system. You can ask whether this could not really happen today, although we still have certainly homeless people, homeless families, but they're not going to starve to death.
No, and if there's something really bad happened, they could go into an emergency room.
Right. But here,
where they would get treatment. They wouldn't pay for it. The system would absorb it, and it's cobbled together other way. But then again, if they're not so crushed down that they don't make the effort.
Right.
But horrible system today. But yeah, you compare it to that.
Yeah, it's so we've come a long way since then. On the other hand, we are still seeing some of the flaws of capitalism. Of basically assuming that the quest for profits is the best way to create well-being, prosperity for everybody. We're still seeing the flaws of that in the same way that they were illuminated in this great book. And I was mentioning it while I was reading or teaching Marx to my students.
Oh, wow.
And Marx was, the funny thing about Marx is that what made him so effective is he talked about the upside of capitalism, how capitalism tends to destroy dogma and traditional authority and dissolves national boundaries and it creates this great bourgeois class of well-educated people and so there's all of that, but that eventually there's this wonderful phrase in Marx, something to the effect that the chief product of the bourgeoisie, what the bourgeoisie really produces is its own grave diggers. That inevitably, as part of the logic of capitalism, you get exploitation of workers and accumulation of wealth and greater division between haves and have-nots, and that certainly is true today as much as it ever was.
Yeah,
and it leads to social instability and resentment.
Yeah.
So the question I would have is whether obviously India is an extraordinary success story in some respects, but the question compared China, but although China is it's not certainly not, it's kind of
success if you step far back and squint your eyes and then don't concentrate too closely on, people's individual lives and a lot of people's individual lives.
Yeah.
I mean, there's winners and losers and every gray in between.
Well, I think some of the positive trends that I just mentioned before, the rise in longevity and prosperity and the spread of democracy even, can be attributed to capitalism, but the question is whether we still need fundamental reforms so that we don't risk something like the Dust Bowl in the 30s,
right? Or a revolution. I mean, there was this interesting book. God, when was that? The 70s, maybe, called "Regulating the Poor." By Francis Fox Plivin and these sociologists, and I don't know anything. I shouldn't even be talking about the books. I don't remember much, but the point that really struck me was that no matter how wealthy you might be, it's to your benefit to have a welfare system.
Right.
To even if you're just morally, fundamentally opposed to it and resentful, you're doing yourself a favor by avoiding a revolution.
You know something though,
or crime or.
Here's where I'm just hunting now for a piece that I clipped out by Nicholas Kristof that really upset me recently. It's on how anti-poverty programs. Here's what it is. There are these anti-poverty programs that actually reward parents he's talking about Appalachia, specifically, reward parents if their children are functionally illiterate, and so some of the parents are deliberately keeping their kids out of school or not helping them as much as they should be to learn how to read and write, because then they won't be eligible for these federal assistance programs.
Oh, so they're gaming the system at the expense of their children.
Keeping their children, basically socially disabled. It's horrible.
Yeah. So you need a corrective to the corrective,
yes.
And no, I mean there's nothing. It's all. You just have different levels of messiness.
Right.
God, and we started out being so optimistic.
But we're muddling along.
Yes.
I'm in the Christmas spirit, are you?
Well, I just looked outside and the snow's coming down like crazy.
Really? Oh, I'm so envious.
Oh, God, you can have it.
It's about 50 degrees here. It's so balmy and...
Oh, I shouldn't say this because we've had such a horrible drought, but I really, we had a snow earlier in the week, and it was a typical Santa Fe snow in the sense, we got 6-8 inches maybe overnight, or most of it's during the day, and then at night a little bit, and then woke up, it was clear still, the sky was blue, it was sunny, and all this beautiful snow, and this is just the opposite. It was, actually I went out last night at about 10:30 and again at 11 and 11:30 to try to see the Geminids meteor shower.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw a few. I probably saw, 5 or 6 meteors, and it normally would have been, great from here because we have such dark, clear skies, even in central Santa Fe. And then I noticed the sky was getting hazier, and by midnight when I went out to look again, which was supposed to be the peak of the Geminid shower, it was really, you couldn't see the stars. And then during the night I heard what sounded like sleet on the roof, and then I woke up this morning and it was drizzling, and then I said, God, do I really want to go outside? And then upstairs to my office, and I did, and just while we've been sitting there, it's turned into pretty major snow.
Wow.
So yeah, it's good if I step back and think of the bigger picture.
You're gonna have a white Christmas. Well,
except my snow shovel's downstairs, of course. So.
Well, I'm worried that this is gonna be the winter when we don't have a hockey season.
Wow.
It's been so warm here lately. So
That's how it was here until a week ago. Yes.
Well, listen, George, we're at 58 minutes. You think we should wrap
God,
it up now?
yeah, we didn't even get to our first topic, but that's okay.
Right. Yeah, we were all over the place as usual.
Yeah, and it all kind of fit together, the early complexity stuff and the Nicholas Taleb and anti-fragility and
state of the planet.
And state of the planet. So
India.
Yeah, it all fits together.
As
so
as long as we think so, it doesn't matter if anybody else doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. We're not expecting great rewards for this.
Or any rewards.
Yeah, come to think of it, I did get this nice web camera out of it, but that was years ago. We'll do this again in a month, and maybe we can save up some of those other topics.
That sounds good, George. I'd like, update me on your book and other things.
Yes. Yes, it's in the copy editing stage now.
Oh, man, I'm so envious.
Very excited. I'm starting to think about ideas for book number 10.
You're an animal, George, a real animal, a word machine.
Well, yeah, that's my job.
All right, well, have a great Christmas and New Year's and everything, and
you too.
I'll talk to you in a month or so.
Okay, John.
Take it easy.